I'll rewrite this 25,000-word story for you. Here's the rewritten version. Hashtag the bridge builder. 10 years ago, she disappeared without a word. Tonight, she's reading bedtime stories to his daughter. Caleb Mercer thought he'd buried the past along with the woman who shattered him. He rebuilt his life one brick at a time, raising Ava alone, working himself to exhaustion just to keep the lights on. But when he walks into that elementary school classroom on a rain-soaked Tuesday night, everything he's constructed begins to crumble. Because Victoria Hale didn't just vanish. She became powerful, untouchable, and somehow she's been in his daughter's life for months. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday evening, turning the cracked asphalt of Riverside Elementary's parking lot into a maze of puddles that reflected the sodium lights above. Caleb Mercer sat in his truck for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled, watching the water stream down his windshield. His hands were still chalky with drywall dust despite the quick scrub he'd given them with the industrial soap in the construction site's porta-potty. There was dust in his hair, too, he knew, and probably ground into the lines of his face. At 32, he looked older, felt older. The parent-teacher conference notice had been crumpled in his pocket for 3 days, gradually softening with sweat and handling until the printed date was barely legible. Mrs. Patterson, 7 p.m., classroom 4B. He'd almost missed it entirely, almost told himself that Ava was doing fine and these things were optional anyway. But the look in his daughter's eyes when she'd reminded him that morning, hopeful, careful, like she was afraid to want too much, had sealed it. Caleb killed the engine and stepped out into the rain. No umbrella. The good jacket was still at the dry cleaners, the one he'd been meaning to pick up for 2 weeks. So he wore his work Carhartt, the canvas jacket that smelled like sawdust and sweat, and jogged toward the school's main entrance with his shoulders hunched against the downpour. Inside, the hallway smelled like floor wax and cafeteria pizza, overlaid with that particular scent of elementary schools everywhere: crayons, construction paper, and the faint sweetness of apple juice. His boots squeaked on the linoleum. Somewhere down the corridor, a child laughed, the sound echoing off metal lockers decorated with handmade fall leaves. Caleb followed the signs toward the 4th grade wing, passing bulletin boards covered in student work. He slowed at one, spotting Ava's distinctive handwriting on a short essay titled "My Hero." His throat tightened. "My dad works really hard. He builds houses so people have homes. He makes the best spaghetti. When I'm sad, he knows without me saying." He touched the edge of the paper, then forced himself to keep walking. Room 4B was at the end of the hall, door propped open, warm light spilling out. Mrs. Patterson's voice drifted through, patient and measured as she spoke with another parent. Caleb checked his watch. 6:58. He leaned against the wall opposite the classroom, trying to look casual, trying not to drip too much on the floor. That's when he saw her. She was walking down the perpendicular hallway, heels clicking on linoleum with rhythmic precision. Navy blue suit, perfectly tailored, dark hair pulled back in a style that was both professional and effortless. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and held her phone in the other hand, her attention fixed on the screen as she walked. Even from 30 feet away, even after 10 years, Caleb would have known that walk anywhere. The particular grace of it, the way she moved like she was perpetually late for something important. Victoria Hale. His breath stopped, actually stopped, trapped somewhere between his lungs and his throat like a physical thing. The hallway seemed to narrow, to telescope, until there was nothing but her and the impossible fact of her presence. His first instinct was to turn, to leave, to get back in his truck and drive until this moment became something that hadn't happened. But his boots were rooted to the linoleum. She was 20 feet away now, 15. Still hadn't looked up from her phone. Caleb's mind spun uselessly, grasping for explanation. This was Riverside Elementary, working-class neighborhood, modest homes, the kind of school that held fundraisers to afford new playground equipment. What was Victoria Hale? Victoria Hale, whose face he'd seen in the business section of the newspaper just last month, some article about her development firm's expansion, doing here. 10 feet. She looked up for a moment, less than a moment, a heartbeat. Her expression was unguarded. Her eyes went wide, lips parting in shock. Every polished piece of her armor fell away, and Caleb saw beneath it to the woman he'd known. The woman who used to laugh at his terrible jokes, who fell asleep with paint under her fingernails, who'd promised him everything and delivered nothing. Then the armor snapped back into place. Caleb. Her voice was different, lower, more controlled. The voice of someone who gave presentations to boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. I didn't. She stopped, seemed to recalibrate. What are you doing here? Parent-teacher conference. The words came out rougher than he'd intended, scraped raw by shock. My daughter, Ava. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Not quite recognition, but something adjacent to it. Understanding, maybe, or dread. Ava Mercer, she said slowly. Not a question, a realization. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Ava had been talking about the reading program for months, about the volunteer who came every Tuesday and Thursday, who brought interesting books and asked questions about what she thought, who'd helped her when some older kids had been giving her trouble at recess. Miss Hale, Ava called her, always with this light in her eyes, this warmth in her voice. You've been. Caleb couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too enormous, too impossible to process, standing in an elementary school hallway under fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered. The reading volunteer program. Victoria's knuckles had gone white around her phone. I didn't know, Caleb. I swear I didn't know she was yours. How long? For months. Since September. For months. Victoria had been in his daughter's life for 4 months. And he'd had no idea. Every Tuesday when he'd picked Ava up and she'd chattered about Miss Hale's recommendations, about how she was nice, but also didn't let anyone get away with being mean, about how she'd convinced the librarian to order the entire Artemis Fowl series. It had been Victoria, the woman who'd left him without a word, without an explanation, without anything except an empty apartment and a note that said, I'm sorry. Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the classroom doorway, a pleasant smile on her face. She was in her 50s, gray hair and kind eyes. The type of teacher every parent hoped their kid would get. I'm ready for you now. Oh, hello, Victoria. Didn't know you'd be here tonight. I was just leaving, Victoria said, her professional mask firmly in place now. I had some materials to drop off. Well, while you're here, Mr. Mercer, you haven't officially met our star volunteer, have you? Victoria has been absolutely wonderful with the reading program. Ava just lights up during their sessions. Caleb felt like he was watching the scene from outside his body. Mrs. Patterson, oblivious to the tension thick enough to choke on, beaming at both of them. Victoria standing there in her perfect suit with her perfect posture, looking like she belonged in a corner office, not an elementary school hallway, and him covered in construction dust, trying to remember how to breathe. We've met, he managed. A long time ago. Mrs. Patterson's smile faltered slightly, picking up on something in his tone. Oh well, small world, isn't it? She gestured toward her classroom. Shall we? Caleb nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As he moved toward the classroom door, he felt Victoria's eyes on him. He didn't look back. Couldn't look back. If he did, he might say something he'd regret, or worse, might say something true. The conference itself passed in a blur. Mrs. Patterson talked about Ava's progress, her strengths in reading comprehension, her struggles with math word problems, her tendency to daydream during lessons, but also her kindness to other students, her creativity, her resilience. Caleb heard maybe half of it. The other half of his brain was stuck in that hallway, replaying the moment Victoria's eyes had met his. The reading program has been particularly good for her, Mrs. Patterson was saying, shuffling through papers covered in Ava's handwriting. She was quite shy at the beginning of the year, but Victoria really drew her out. They have such a lovely rapport. Yeah. Caleb's jaw ached from clenching it. Ava talks about her. She's been so generous with her time. I know she has an incredibly demanding job. I looked her up after she first volunteered, and I was just amazed. CEO of Hale Development. All those big projects downtown. But she never misses a session with Ava. Rain or shine, she's here. Something in Caleb's chest twisted. He didn't want to know this. Didn't want to think about Victoria showing up, being reliable, being someone Ava could count on. It was easier when she was just the woman who'd left. When she was a ghost, not a person who read with his daughter twice a week. Mrs. Patterson pulled out a reading log. Ava's been working through some fairly advanced material for her age. Look here. She finished A Wrinkle in Time last week. That's typically 5th or 6th grade level. Victoria has been guiding her, but never pushing too hard. She has a real gift for meeting children where they are. Caleb took the log, staring at Ava's careful notes. Beside each book title, there were comments in 2 different handwritings. Ava's enthusiastic scrawl and another hand, neater, more measured. Victoria's hand. This book made me think about being brave even when you're scared. Ava had written beside a wrinkle in time. What kind of brave do you think is hardest? Victoria had written back. The kind where you have to keep going even when you don't know if it will work out. Caleb's vision blurred. He handed the log back quickly. She's doing really well, Mrs. Patterson said gently. You should be proud, Mr. Mercer. I know it's not easy raising a child on your own, but Ava is thriving. Thank you. He stood suddenly, desperate to be out of this room, this school, this situation. I appreciate your time. Of course. Oh, and we have the fall festival coming up next month. Ava's been talking about entering the writing contest. I hope you can make it. It's on a Saturday afternoon this year. Thought that might be easier for working parents. I'll be there. He made it out of the classroom, down the hallway, almost to the exit before he heard her voice. Caleb, wait. He stopped, closed his eyes, counted to 3, turned around. Victoria stood 15 feet away, portfolio still clutched under her arm, but the phone was gone now. Her free hand twisted the strap of her purse, the only outward sign of nerves. Under the harsh hallway lighting, he could see faint shadows under her eyes, small lines at the corners of her mouth that hadn't been there 10 years ago. She looked expensive, successful, powerful, and utterly wrecked. We need to talk, she said. No. The word came out harder than stone. We really don't. About Ava. Don't. He took a step forward, and she actually flinched. Good. He wanted her uncomfortable. Wanted her to feel a fraction of what he'd felt finding out like this. Don't you dare say her name like you have any right to her. I didn't know. Victoria's voice cracked on the last word. I swear to you, I had no idea she was your daughter. The volunteer coordinator just gave me a list of students who needed reading support. I saw her name, Ava Mercer, and it never occurred to me. She swallowed hard. I never thought you'd have a life after I left, that you'd moved on, that you'd have a child. She stopped, watching his face. The timing. Ava was 8, 9 next month. He watched her do the math, watched the realization settle over her like cold water. If Ava was almost 9, she would have been born less than 2 years after Victoria disappeared, which meant, who? Victoria started, then stopped. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. No, Caleb agreed coldly. It's not. The truth was complicated, and he wasn't about to explain it to her. Wasn't about to tell her about Melissa, the woman he'd tried so hard to love in the wake of Victoria's absence, about the pregnancy that had surprised them both, the hurried wedding at the courthouse, the 2 years of trying to make something work that had been broken from the start, about the car accident on I-40 that had taken Melissa when Ava was barely 2, leaving him with a toddler and a grief he hadn't earned the right to feel because he'd never loved his wife the way she deserved. Victoria didn't get to know any of that. She'd surrendered the right to know him when she'd walked away. I'll step down from the volunteer program, Victoria said quietly. Effective immediately. I'll tell Mrs. Patterson there was a conflict of interest or that my work schedule changed. No. What? You don't get to do that. Caleb could feel the anger building, hot and righteous. You don't get to become important to her and then just disappear. You think I don't know what that does to a kid? She lost her mother when she was too young to remember her. I'm not letting her lose someone else she trusts. But if it makes you uncomfortable, this isn't about me. The words echoed down the empty hallway. Caleb took a breath, forced his voice lower. Ava talks about you constantly. You're helping her. She's happy when she talks about your sessions. I won't take that away from her just because you and I have history. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Caleb, but we're setting ground rules. He ticked them off on his fingers. 1. You show up when you're supposed to show up. You don't miss sessions unless you're hospitalized or dead. 2. This stays between us. Ava doesn't need to know we knew each other. 3. If you hurt her, if you let her down, if you even think about walking away without warning, I will make sure you regret it. Are we clear? Crystal. She wiped at her eyes quickly, a gesture so familiar it made his chest ache. I would never hurt her. I promise. Your promises don't mean much to me. The words landed like a slap. Victoria's face went pale, but she nodded. Fair enough. They stood there in the fluorescent lighting, the rain still hammering against the windows at the end of the hall. Two people who'd once known every inch of each other's hearts, now separated by a canyon of years and hurt. I should go, Victoria said finally. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Yeah, I need to pick up Ava from my neighbors. She turned to leave, then paused. Caleb, for what it's worth, she's an incredible kid. Smart, kind, braver than she thinks she is. You've done a remarkable job with her. I know, he said because he did. Because Ava was the one thing in his life he'd never doubted, never questioned. She was his North Star, his purpose, the reason he dragged himself out of bed when the weight of loneliness threatened to keep him there. Victoria walked away, her heels clicking on the linoleum, getting fainter and fainter until the sound disappeared entirely. Caleb stood in the empty hallway for another minute, trying to collect the shattered pieces of his composure. Then he pushed through the exit doors into the rain. The drive to pick up Ava took 15 minutes. Mrs. Chun lived 3 blocks over in a house almost identical to their rental. Small, worn, but clean and safe. She was 72 and widowed, and she treated Ava like the granddaughter she'd never had. Caleb paid her what he could, which was never enough, and she always waved away his attempts to pay more. She's an angel, Mrs. Chin said when she opened the door, her lined face creasing into a smile. No trouble at all. We made cookies. You didn't have to do that. What else am I going to do with my Tuesday nights? She's in the living room. Ava was curled up on Mrs. Chin's ancient sofa, a book open in her lap.